I held the package against the kitchen light, turning it slowly in my hands, and the moment I saw what was printed in the top left corner, my stomach dropped straight to the floor. It had been 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days since my son last spoke to me. I know that number because I counted. I still count. You don't stop counting when it's your own child. The package was small, about the size of a thick paperback novel, wrapped in brown craft paper and sealed with clear tape. The handwriting on the front was his. I'd know it anywhere. That same left-leaning print he'd had since the 3rd grade, the way his capital letters always slanted just slightly, like they were leaning into a wind only he could feel. My name and address were there, written carefully. But it was the return address that stopped me cold. It wasn't his house. I stood there at the kitchen counter for a long moment, not moving. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. The refrigerator hummed. My coffee sat getting cold next to the sink, and I just stood there reading that address over and over like it might change if I looked at it long enough. The street name was Halverson Mill Road. I didn't recognize it. The city listed was Colburn, a small town about 3 hours north where my son and his wife had lived when I last knew their address. Why would he be writing to me from Colburn? Why would he be in Colburn at all? I set the package down on the counter and went to sit at the kitchen table. I needed a minute. I needed more than a minute, actually, but a minute was what I gave myself. Let me back up. My son's name is Rowan. He's 34 years old. He was born on a Tuesday morning in October, during a rainstorm that knocked out the power to half the hospital. I used to tell him that story every year on his birthday, how the nurses had used flashlights, how his mother had laughed through her exhaustion when the lights came back on right as he took his first breath. He used to roll his eyes at that story when he was a teenager. By the time he was in his 20s, he'd started asking me to tell it again. I don't know when his wife turned him against me. I've tried to figure out the exact moment, and I can't. It wasn't a single conversation, a single argument, a single door slamming shut. It was more like watching a tide go out. You don't notice it happening until the water is already gone, and you're standing on wet sand wondering where the ocean went. Her name is Sable. She came into Rowan's life about 5 years ago, introduced through a mutual friend at some party I wasn't invited to. I didn't think much of her at first, not because there was anything obviously wrong, but because Rowan had dated a few women before her and none of them had stuck. So I didn't let myself get too attached to the idea. But this one stuck. At first I told myself I was being too hard on her. She was quiet around me, which I read as shyness. She had opinions about things I didn't understand, which I tried to respect. She called me by my first name, Harold, which felt slightly off to me. But I told myself it was generational, that young people did that now, and it didn't mean anything. Then the visits got shorter. Then the phone calls from Rowan got less frequent. Then one Christmas, they didn't come at all. He called me from the car. I found out later. He'd called while they were already on the highway heading somewhere else. Her sister's place, 2 states away, and he didn't mention any of this on the phone. Just said they were having a quiet holiday this year. Hoped I understood. Said he'd call me in the new year. He didn't call in the new year. But the following spring, the calls had stopped entirely. I tried reaching out, texts that went unanswered, voicemails that were never returned. I drove to their house once, about 14 months into the silence, and no one answered the door even though his truck was in the driveway. I sat outside in my car for 20 minutes, feeling like a fool, before I drove home. My daughter, Rowan's sister, Loretta, tried to tell me early on that Sable had been saying things. She'd heard it through her own husband's family, who had some connection to a friend of Sable's. Apparently I was described as controlling. Apparently there were stories being told about me that I didn't recognize as my own life. Loretta said this to me carefully, the way you tell someone they have something in their teeth, trying to be kind about something unkind. I didn't want to believe it. I still don't fully understand it. I was not a perfect father. I know that. I worked too much when Rowan was young. I wasn't always the most emotionally available man in the room, but I loved my son, and I showed up for him in the ways I knew how, and I never gave him reason to just disappear. That's the part that breaks you, not the anger, the not understanding. So when that package arrived on a rainy Wednesday afternoon in March, I sat at my kitchen table and I stared at it for a long time before I got up and went back to the counter and picked it up again. I turned it over in my hands. It was light, lighter than I expected. Whatever was inside wasn't heavy. I pressed gently on the sides and felt something firm in the center, maybe a box of some kind inside the outer wrapping. I almost called Loretta before I opened it. I almost called her to say he sent something. He reached out. After everything, he reached out. After everything, he reached out. But I didn't want to get her hopes up until I knew what was inside, because I still didn't know what this was. Was it an olive branch? Was it something legal? Was it something Sable had put him up to that I wasn't going to like? I sat back down at the table with the package, and I opened it carefully, peeling back the tape on the seams rather than tearing it, the way my mother always told me to open gifts. Old habit. Inside the craft paper was a plain white box, the kind that stationery comes in, and inside the box, nestled on a piece of folded tissue paper, was a watch. My watch. I recognized it before I even picked it up. A Seiko automatic, stainless steel, with a cream-colored dial and Roman numerals. I'd owned that watch for 30 years. My own father had given it to me when I turned 40, and I'd worn it every day for more than a decade before the crown stopped working, and I'd put it in a drawer and never gotten around to having it repaired. At some point, I'd honestly forgotten exactly when, I'd given it to Rowan. He'd always admired it. I said, "Take it, get it fixed if you want. It's yours." That was the watch. In the box. Wrapped in tissue paper. I lifted it out and held it. The crystal was clean. The hands were moving. Someone had gotten it repaired. There was a card tucked in under the tissue paper, folded in thirds. I set the watch down on the table and opened the card. It was his handwriting. Just a few lines. "Dad, I found someone to fix this. Thought you should have it back. I don't know how to say the rest of it yet, but I wanted you to know I've been thinking about you." Rowan, I read it 3 times. Then I put it down on the table and I sat very still with my hands flat on either side of it, and I breathed. "I've been thinking about you." He'd been thinking about me. The rest of it I didn't know how to parse yet. What rest? What couldn't he say? What he'd even thinking? But he'd sent the watch. He'd had it repaired and he'd sent it back. After 2 years and 4 months and 11 days, that was what arrived on my doorstep on a rainy Wednesday. A watch, a few sentences. A door left open just a crack. I called Loretta. She was quiet for a long time after I read her the card. Then she said, "Harold, where's he writing from?" I told her about the Colburn address. Another silence. "That's not where they live," she said. "I know. So what does that mean?" I said I didn't know. And I didn't. But I also didn't want to call him right away. Something in me, maybe old instinct, maybe the self-protective part that had spent 2 years trying not to think about the phone calls that never came, said to wait, to not lunge at this, to give it a day or two and think. I put the watch on. It fit the same way it always had. I thought about him for 3 days before I called the number I still had saved in my phone. The same one that had rung unanswered all those times before. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee at 7 in the morning on a Saturday, and I dialed. It rang twice. Then he picked up. Dad. Just that one word. But his voice. I hadn't heard his voice in over 2 years, and it still sounded like my son. Tired, but still him. I said, "I got the watch." He said, "I know." Then neither of us said anything for a moment, and I let the silence sit there between us, because I'd learned over the years that sometimes silence is the only honest thing. "Where are you?" I asked him finally. He told me he was renting a room in Colburn, had been for the past 3 months. He and Sable had separated. He said it simply, without drama, like he was telling me the weather. I didn't say what I wanted to say. I waited. It's been a bad couple of years, he said. For me too, I said. I wasn't accusatory, I was just honest. He was quiet again. Then he said, I know, Dad, I know. I asked if he wanted to tell me what happened. He said not yet. He said he needed to figure some things out first, but that he wanted me to know, he needed me to know, that a lot of what had happened wasn't simple, and that he hadn't been fully himself for a long time, and that he was sorry. He said he was sorry. I'd wanted to hear those words for so long that when they actually came, I didn't know what to do with them. I think I just said, okay. Not coldly. I hope not coldly. Just the only word that came. We talked for 40 minutes, about nothing much, about a sports team he was following, about a book I'd been reading, about the way spring was coming late this year. Normal things. Small things. The kind of things you talk about when you're rebuilding and you don't want to move too fast. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. I was glad. But I wasn't foolish. I knew this was the beginning of something long. Whatever had happened between Rowan and Sable, whatever had happened between Rowan and me over these past years, none of it would resolve in a phone call. People don't change all at once. Situations don't untangle all at once. And as much as I wanted to drive up to Colburn that same afternoon and sit across from my son at a diner table and just look at his face, I knew that wasn't the right move. What I didn't know was that things were more complicated than they appeared. 3 weeks after that first phone call, Rowan drove down to see me. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd opened the package. I made coffee. He looked thinner than I remembered. He had a beard he hadn't had before, and there were lines around his eyes that I didn't recognize. He looked like a man who had been through something. He told me, slowly, over the course of 2 hours, what had happened. Sable had debts, significant debts. She'd been spending money they didn't have for years. On what, exactly, he was still trying to piece together. By the time he figured out what was going on, they were in serious financial trouble. She'd taken out a line of credit in both their names without telling him. She'd borrowed money from her own family and told them it was for a home renovation that never happened. She convinced Rowan to pull from his retirement account twice in 2 years, each time with a different story about why it was necessary. He looked at the table when he told me this. He didn't look at me. I should have seen it, he said. You loved her, I said. That's not an excuse. I didn't say it was. I said it was a reason. He was quiet. I asked him how bad the financial damage was. He told me. It was bad. Not insurmountable, but bad. He'd been talking to a financial counselor in Colburn, which was part of why he'd moved there. A fresh start. Cheaper cost of living. Time to rebuild. I asked about the divorce. Filed, he said. Her lawyer is trying to complicate it. Claims I was controlling. He said that last word with a particular flatness, and when he looked up at me, I understood something without him having to say it. The word controlling. The same word Loretta had told me, years ago, had been used about me. I said, that was her word for anyone who noticed what she was doing. He nodded. Once. Small. I asked him why he'd cut me off. Why, of all the people in his life, I'd been one of the first to go. He put his hands around his coffee mug and stared at it for a long time before he answered. What he said was hard to hear. He said that Sable had told him, early on, that I'd never approved of her, that I'd made comments to Rowan about her before they were married, that I'd tried to interfere in their relationship. He said he hadn't fully believed her at first, but she was persistent and she was smart. And over time, he'd started to see her version of things everywhere. Even in memories he'd replayed so many times that he wasn't sure anymore what was real and what she'd told him. She was good at it, he said. That's the only way I can explain it. She was very, very good at it. I thought about all the calls that went unanswered. The Christmas he drove past without stopping. The 14 months of silence. I thought about sitting in my car outside his house while his truck sat in the driveway. When did you start to see it? I asked. He said it had been gradual. The financial stuff had cracked things open. Once he started questioning her about the money, The whole structure started to show its seams. He'd found a credit card statement that didn't match what she'd told him. He'd called the bank. Then he'd started going back through records, and one thing led to another. But the bigger shift, he said, the real shift, had happened about 8 months ago. He'd been at his cousin's house for a family gathering. Someone had said something offhand about me, something kind. Just a casual mention, nothing significant. And Rowan said he'd felt this strange dissonance, because the man being described wasn't the man Sable had drawn for him over the past 5 years. And he'd driven home that night and sat in his car in his own driveway and thought about that for a long time. I started writing a letter to you, he said, about 6 months ago. I couldn't finish it. I started it over probably 5 times. I know, I said. You sent me something better. He looked up. The watch, I said. You had it fixed. He almost smiled. I'd had it for years, never got around to it. Then I figured that's where I'd start, something I could actually do. We sat with that for a moment. I told him something I hadn't planned to say. I told him that I'd spent a long time being angry, not at him, exactly, or maybe at him, but also at myself, and at the whole shape of how things had gone. I told him I'd gone back through years of memories and second-guessed every conversation, looking for the thing I must have done wrong. I told him I'd had whole arguments in my head with people who weren't there. I told him that being on the outside of your own child's life is a specific kind of pain that doesn't have a name, and that I wouldn't wish it on anyone. He listened to all of this without interrupting. Then he said, I'm sorry, Dad. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry. I told him it was a start. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. It was messy, the way these things always are. Sable's lawyer had tried several angles, including the claim that Rowan had been financially controlling, which, given what the documents actually showed, did not hold up well. The joint credit line taken out without his knowledge, the retirement withdrawal she'd pressured him into, a paper trail that, once assembled, told a clear enough story. I won't pretend I didn't feel something when Rowan called to tell me it was done. Something that was not quite satisfaction, because I don't take satisfaction in other people's unhappiness. Even people who've hurt my family, but something, relief maybe, the sense of a door finally, firmly closing on something that should have closed a long time ago. What I did take real satisfaction in was what happened next. Rowan moved back closer to home. Not the same town, but about 40 minutes away, a small place with a yard and a garage he was fixing up. We started having dinner on Sunday evenings, him driving down or me driving up, alternating. Loretta joined sometimes. My grandson, Loretta's boy, who had asked about his uncle on and off through all of this, got to see his uncle again for the first time in 2 years at a birthday party in the fall, and the way those two looked at each other across a backyard full of people said more than I could put into words. It's not the same as before. I'll say that, honestly. Something shifted that doesn't fully shift back. Rowan and I talk differently now, more carefully in some ways, more honestly in others. There are things we still haven't addressed directly. Things that might take years. We don't pretend otherwise. But last Sunday he came for dinner, and we sat at the kitchen table after the dishes were done, just talking. No particular agenda. Just two people who know each other well. Getting reacquainted with knowing each other again. At some point, he noticed the watch on my wrist. He hadn't seen me wearing it since he'd sent it back. Still running? He asked. I held up my wrist. The hands moved steadily around the dial. The same way they had for 30 years. The same way they'd kept time through everything. Still running, I said. He nodded like that meant something. I think it did. I've thought a lot since all of this about what I would tell another parent in the same situation. Someone whose child has gone quiet and they don't know why. Someone who has tried every door and found them locked. Someone who has sat in the parked car outside a house with a truck in the driveway and driven home alone. What I tell them is this. Don't disappear. Even when it seems like nothing you do makes a difference. Don't let the silence become permanent on your end, even if it's permanent on theirs for a while. Send the cards. Leave the voicemails. Don't be aggressive. Don't make ultimatums. Don't force it, but don't vanish. because sometimes the only thing standing between your child and their way back to you is the knowledge that the door is still there. The door is still there. That's all Rowan needed to know. And I'm grateful I never stopped being the door.